I have your bearings. Male narrator, 60 plus, first person, addresses the audience by relationship terms. Neighbor, friend, American audience. Let me write a complete new to 5,500 word story following the proven structure. Different profession, different crime, different climax mechanism, but the same emotional engine. My daughter-in-law backed my pickup out of the driveway at 11 at night and never told me where she was going. 6 hours later, a stranger was dead on Route 9, and by morning my son was standing in my kitchen, holding out a mug of coffee like it was a bribe, telling me that if anyone asked, I was the one behind the wheel. I want you to sit with that for a second, friend, because I did. I sat with it a long time before I understood exactly what he was asking me to become. Thank you for being here. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened to me, but I'll tell it to you anyway, because a story told by a man with no name isn't worth trusting. I'm Walter Bishop. I'm 66 years old, and for 31 years, I worked as a claims investigator for an insurance company out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which means I spent 3 decades learning exactly how people lie, how they cover it, and how long it usually takes before the truth crawls back out from wherever they buried it. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, neighbor. I read every comment. Now, before I go further, I want to say plainly that some details in this story have been changed to protect the people still living inside it. But the heart of it is true, and what it cost me was real. I want to start on an ordinary Tuesday, because that's how it always starts, isn't it? Nothing dramatic. I was sitting on my back porch in Mechanicsburg, just outside the city, drinking coffee out of a mug my late wife Carol had painted herself 30 years ago, a chipped thing with a robin on it that I refused to replace even after the handle cracked, and I had to hold it with 2 hands. The maple in the yard was turning that first rusty orange it gets in late September, and I remember thinking that I needed to get up on the ladder before the weekend and clean the gutters, because I was still a man who did his own gutters at 66. Still a man who mowed his own lawn in perfect diagonal stripes, because Carol used to stand at the kitchen window and tell me it looked like a golf course, and I liked hearing her say that even now, 4 years after she was gone, even though there was nobody standing at the window anymore. My son Adam is 34. He's sharp, always has been, the kind of sharp that got him a law degree from Penn State and a partnership track at a firm downtown before he turned 30. I built garages and read blueprints for other men's houses my whole career on the side, moonlighting as a home inspector after the insurance job wound down, and Adam grew up watching me climb into crawl spaces with a flashlight in my teeth, and I think some part of him decided early that he would never get his hands that dirty. I don't say that with any bitterness. A father wants his son to climb higher than he did. That's the whole point of the ladder. What I didn't expect, what I don't think any father expects, is what a son will do once he's standing at the top of it and looks down and sees exactly how far there is to fall. His wife is named Priya. She's 31, works in pharmaceutical sales, drives a lot for her job, drove a lot that particular week because her territory had just expanded into 3 new counties. I liked her, friend. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else, because what's coming isn't really about whether Priya was a good person. It's about what happens to good people when somebody they trust hands them a way out of a bad decision and tells them to take it. The night it happened, I was asleep by 10:30, the way I always am, because at my age your body starts setting its own rules and stops asking permission. I have a security system on my property, cameras covering the driveway and the detached garage where I keep my truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 I've had since it rolled off the lot with 11 miles on it. Old habit from the insurance years. You spend 3 decades proving that people lie about what happened to their cars. You start keeping better records of your own. At 11:04 p.m., the camera shows Priya's little silver Honda pulling into my driveway, and Priya getting out and walking up to my garage, and using the spare key code I'd given her and Adam 2 years back for exactly this kind of emergency, the kind where your car's in the shop and you need to borrow something reliable. My truck backs out at 11:09. I didn't hear a thing. I was fast asleep with my hearing aids on the nightstand, useless, the way they are every night, and the last thing on God's earth I would have imagined is that my own daughter-in-law was borrowing my truck at 11 at night without so much as a knock on my door. I want to slow down here, friend. because this is the part where everything changes, and I think it deserves to be told slow, the way it actually happened to me, in pieces, over hours, not all at once, the way I'm about to tell it to you now. My phone rang at 6:40 the next morning. It was Adam, and his voice had a pitch to it I hadn't heard since he was 9 years old and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball. "Dad," he said, "I need you to come to the house right now. Don't ask me anything on the phone. Just come. I've raised one child in my life, and I know what fear sounds like coming out of him." So I didn't argue. I got dressed and drove the 20 minutes to his place in Camp Hill in my other vehicle, an old Buick I keep for exactly this kind of morning, though I didn't know yet how exactly this kind of morning it would turn out to be. When I got there, Adam met me at the door before I could even knock, and he pulled me inside like he was afraid the neighbors might see, and Priya was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, and her eyes were red in a way that told me she hadn't slept and hadn't stopped crying long enough to sleep. And Adam sat me down across from both of them and told me that last night, on her way home from a late dinner with a client, Priya had been driving my truck on Route 9 near the overpass by Silver Spring Township, and a man had come off the shoulder, and it happened too fast to stop, and he didn't survive it. I want you to understand something about me, friend. 31 years in insurance claims teaches you to listen for two things at once. You listen to what a person is telling you, and you listen to the shape of the silence around it, the places where the story goes quiet because the truth doesn't fit through the gap they've left for it. And sitting there in my son's kitchen at 7 in the morning, I heard both. I heard my daughter-in-law's grief, which was real. I have no doubt of that to this day. And I heard my son's silence in exactly the wrong places. The places where an innocent man asks, "Did you call 911? Did you stay? Is she hurt?" And instead, what Adam asked me, before he asked me anything else, before he even asked if I was all right with any of this, was whether anyone at my house had cameras that could place the truck at a specific time. That's when I understood he wasn't asking me here to comfort his wife. He was asking me here to manage a problem. He laid it out for me like he was presenting a closing argument, calm, methodical, the same voice he uses on opposing counsel. "Dad," he said. Priya panicked and drove home instead of stopping, and I know how that sounds. I know it. But if she's the one who's found to have fled the scene, we're talking about vehicular manslaughter with a hit-and-run enhancement. We're talking about her whole career, her license to practice in 3 states, possibly prison time. And then he looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was small and wanted something he knew I'd say no to. And he said, "But you're retired, Dad. You don't have a career left to lose." Nobody's going to come down hard on a 66-year-old man with a clean record for a first accident. If you tell them you were the one driving, this whole thing becomes something survivable for this family instead of something that destroys it. I sat there holding a coffee cup I hadn't touched, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the way it does right before you understand you're about to lose something you can't get back. I said, "Adam, you're asking me to confess to killing a man I never met." And he said, "Dad, you're not confessing to anything. You're just letting people believe something that isn't going to hurt anyone who matters. Nobody who matters." That's the phrase that has stayed lodged in me every single day since, friend. Nobody who matters. As if the man bleeding out on the shoulder of Route 9 didn't matter. As if I, sitting right there at that table, 31 years of building a name for honesty, didn't matter enough to be asked, instead of told. I didn't say yes that morning. I didn't say no either. I told them I needed to go home and think, and Adam gripped my shoulder at the door the way he used to do after a Little League game, whether we'd won or lost. And he said, "Dad, I know this is a lot, but you're the only one who can fix this." And I drove home in that old Buick with my hands shaking on the wheel worse than they'd shaken in 20 years. And I want to tell you, friend, that the very first thing I did when I walked back into my own kitchen was not call the police, and it was not call a lawyer. It was go straight to my garage because 31 years in claims investigation had already told me exactly where to look. My truck has a dash camera. I installed it 4 years ago after a kid ran a red light and hit me on 15, and the insurance company I used to work for tried to argue fault against me until I produced footage that ended the conversation in about 90 seconds. Old habits, friend. You learn what protects you, and you never stop carrying it. The camera runs on a loop, backs itself up to a cloud account. I still pay $11 a month for out of pure stubbornness. And I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, the same table where Carol used to do the crossword every Sunday morning, and I opened the footage from the night before. And I watched. Priya pull the truck out of my driveway at 11:09. I watched her driving Route 9, watched the headlights of the overpass come up in the frame, and I want to be honest with you about what I saw, because I promised myself I would never tell this story crooked just to make it easier to hear. I saw a man step out from behind a parked delivery van on the shoulder, not from the sidewalk, not from a crosswalk, from behind a vehicle where no reasonable driver would have seen him in time, at 11 at night, in a stretch of road with exactly one working streetlight for 400 yards. I saw the impact. I heard Priya scream, and then I saw the truck slow, and I saw it stop, 30 yards past the man on the ground, brake lights holding steady for 11 full seconds. She didn't drive away, friend, not right off. She sat there with her hazards ticking for 11 seconds before the truck pulled forward again and turned off at the next side street. I called Priya myself that same afternoon without telling Adam, and I asked her one question. I asked her, "Did you call 911?" And she broke down crying on the phone in a way that told me everything before she even got the words out. She said she'd panicked. She'd sat there for those 11 seconds trying to make her hands work the phone and couldn't. And then Adam had called her, because she'd texted him the second she got clear of the intersection. 3 words, "I hit someone," and Adam had told her, on the phone, while that man was still lying on the shoulder of Route 9, "Drive to my house. Don't stop for anyone. Don't call anyone. We'll figure this out together." Somebody else called it in. I checked the incident report 2 days later, the way I know how to check these things, and a passing trucker had phoned it in at 11:19, 10 minutes after impact, and paramedics arrived at 11:31. The man's name was Gregory Alsop. He was 58 years old, a diesel mechanic, out walking home after his car broke down 3 miles back because he didn't want to bother anybody for a ride at that hour. He had 2 grown daughters and a dog waiting for him that never stopped waiting that night. He died in the ambulance before it reached the hospital. And my son's first phone call after learning all of that was not to check if the man could still be saved. It was to make sure his wife didn't call anyone who could trace it back to their address. I sat with that dashcam footage open on my laptop for 3 days before I did anything at all, friend, and I want to tell you honestly what those 3 days were like, because I think you deserve the truth of it, and not just the tidy version. I barely slept. I made coffee I never drank. I walked out to the garage at 2 in the morning more than once just to stand next to that truck like it might tell me something the footage hadn't already told me. I thought about the boy who used to sit in the bleachers next to me at every one of his own baseball games, chewing sunflower seeds, cheering himself hoarse. I thought about the version of Adam who used to run to me first with every scraped knee, and I tried to understand how that boy had grown into a man who could stand in his own kitchen and ask his father to become a criminal so that his wife's mistake would cost the family nothing. Here's what finally moved me, neighbor, and I want you to hear this part clearly, because I think it's the part that matters most in this whole story. It wasn't anger at Adam that got me off that couch. It was Gregory Alsop's daughters. I looked them up. I found an old church newsletter with a photograph from a fundraiser, the 2 of them standing next to their father at a folding table selling raffle tickets for a new fire truck, and something about that photograph, 2 young women who didn't yet know their father had less than a year left, undid something in me that 3 days of grief and rage had not been able to touch. I thought about what it would mean for those 2 women to spend the rest of their lives believing an old man in a truck he barely drove had killed their father by accident, when the truth was that the woman behind the wheel had panicked, and the man who could have made it right had told her to run instead. I am not, and I have never been, a man who believes in letting the guilty walk free to protect the innocent from consequences. I spent 31 years proving that principle for a paycheck. I wasn't about to abandon it for my own blood. So I made a decision that Thursday night, sitting alone at that kitchen table with Carol's chipped mug in front of me. And the decision was this. I would not confess to a crime I didn't commit, and I would not let my son bury this either, not by using me, and not by letting Priya carry the weight of a decision that Adam had made for her in the first 90 seconds after that phone call. But I also understood something from 31 years in claims work that I don't think either of them understood yet, which is that the truth doesn't need you to shout it. It needs you to be patient enough to let it arrive on its own terms. At the moment, it can't be talked away. I called a lawyer the next morning, not for myself, a criminal defense attorney named Denise Okafor I'd worked alongside on fraud cases 20 years earlier. A woman I trusted the way you trust somebody who's seen you at your most exhausted and never once used it against you. I told her everything. I gave her the footage. And she told me something I have carried with me every day since. She said, "Walter, the worst thing you can do right now is act out of anger, because anger makes people sloppy, and sloppy is how the guilty walk and the innocent get buried under them." She told me the truck's footage, time-stamped and backed up to a third-party cloud server I didn't control and couldn't be accused of altering, was the strongest piece of evidence in this entire situation, and that the smartest thing I could do was protect it, document everything around it, and wait for the moment it would matter most. So that's what I did, friend. For 6 weeks, I said almost nothing to Adam. I let him believe I was still deciding. I let him call me twice a week, sometimes gentle, reminding me how much this would help the family, sometimes sharper, reminding me what I owed him as my son. I let Priya cry to me on the phone in private, and I started quietly encouraging her, not toward silence, but toward an attorney of her own, one who had no connection to Adam's firm, a young woman named Rachel Tam who specialized exactly in cases where a client had been talked into a decision by somebody they trusted. I drove Priya to that first meeting myself, on a Tuesday, and I sat in the parking lot for the full 90 minutes, because I didn't think she should walk into that office alone. Whatever she had done, whatever she still had to answer for, she was carrying something Adam had handed her in a moment of panic, and I wasn't going to let her carry it by herself the way I once let Carol carry the weight of raising Adam alone during the years I traveled too much for work. The call from Adam that finally broke everything open came at 3 a.m. on a Sunday in November, 6 weeks after the accident. I remember the exact time, because I was awake already, sitting in the dark kitchen the way I'd started doing most nights, and my phone lit up the room before it even rang. He was drunk, friend, or close enough to it, his words loose at the edges in a way I'd only heard once before, the week after his mother's funeral. He said the detective assigned to the case had called him that afternoon, wanting to schedule a formal interview with Priya, and that the case had been reopened because Gregory Alsop's family had hired their own investigator after growing suspicious of how quickly the original file had gone quiet, and Adam's voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was small. And he said, "Dad, I need you to call them tomorrow and tell them it was you. I need you to do this now. There's no more time to think about it." I sat very still in that dark kitchen, and I said, "Adam, I've had 6 weeks to think about it, and I already know exactly what I'm going to do." And then I told him. I told him I had the dash cam footage. I told him I knew about the 11 seconds. Priya sat there with her hazards on before driving away, and I told him I knew that the very first thing he did after learning a man was dying on the pavement was tell his wife to run, instead of telling her to call for help. I told him I had already given a full statement to Denise weeks ago, and that Priya had her own attorney now, separate from him, separate from his firm, and that whatever happened next was going to happen on the truth, not on whichever version of the truth was most convenient for him. The silence on that phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said one word, "Why?" Just that, "Why?" As if the only explanation he could imagine for a father telling the truth was betrayal. I told him something then that I want to say to you now too, neighbor, because I think it's the whole reason I'm telling you this story at all. I said, "Adam, I have spent my entire life building things that were meant to hold weight. Houses, trust, this family. And you cannot build something to hold weight by asking the people around you to absorb the parts that are too heavy for you to carry yourself. That's not love. That's just moving the load onto somebody else's back and calling it family." He hung up on me. I didn't call back. 3 days later, Detective Marisol Reyes called and asked if I would come in voluntarily to give a formal statement. And I want you to know I walked into that station with Denise beside me and my chin up because I had absolutely nothing to hide, and I had spent 6 weeks making certain of it. I told them everything. I gave them the original device, the truck's onboard recorder, still in the truck, untouched, and I gave them the cloud account credentials so their own forensic team could verify the footage hadn't been altered by a single frame. I told them about the 11 seconds. I told them about Adam's instruction to drive away, and I told them, plainly, that I had never been behind the wheel of that truck the night Gregory Alsop died, and that I would swear to that under oath in any courtroom in this country. What happened after that took another 4 months, friend. Because the truth, once it starts moving, doesn't move fast. It moves thoroughly, and thoroughly takes time. Priya was charged, in the end, not with the harshest version of what might have been possible, because her own attorney negotiated hard on the 11 seconds. On the panic, on the genuine effort she made to stop before Adam's voice on the phone told her not to, and she pled to leaving the scene, a lesser charge than what she'd have faced if she'd simply vanished for good. And she received probation, community service, and the loss of her professional license for 3 years. She wrote a letter to Gregory Alsop's daughters that I understand she is still, to this day, not certain they will ever answer, and I don't blame either side of that silence. Adam is the one this cost the most, and I won't pretend otherwise to make this story feel gentler than it was. Because it wasn't only the cover-up that came out in that investigation, friend. Once Detective Reyes started pulling the thread, she found something else entirely, something I hadn't known and hadn't gone looking for. Adam's firm had been under a quiet state bar inquiry for 8 months already, over funds moved out of a client trust account, money that belonged to an elderly widow whose estate Adam had been managing, money that had gone missing in pieces small enough that nobody had noticed until somebody finally did. The obstruction charge tied to Gregory Alsop's case was what broke it wide open, because once a prosecutor starts looking hard at a man who told his wife to flee a fatal accident and then tried to hand the blame to his own father, that prosecutor starts looking hard at everything else that man has touched. Adam was disbarred. He is currently serving 18 months for the trust account fraud, with the obstruction charge running concurrent, and I visit him every second Saturday in a room with fluorescent lights and metal tables bolted to the floor, and neither of us has yet found all the words we need for what sits between us now. I want to tell you something before I close this out, friend, because I think it's the only part of this that actually matters once the facts have all been laid out on the table. I did not do what I did to punish my son. I want that understood clearly. I did it because somewhere in that kitchen, 6 weeks before any of the arrests, before any of it became public, I understood a truth I had spent 31 years proving for other people's insurance claims but had somehow never fully applied to my own family, which is this. Protecting somebody from the truth is not the same thing as protecting them. It only postpones the bill, and it adds interest, and eventually somebody has to pay it, and more often than not, it isn't the person who ran up the debt. I still keep Carol's chipped mug on the same shelf. I still mow the lawn in diagonal stripes, even though there's nobody at the window to notice anymore. Because some habits aren't really about who's watching, they're about who you decide to be when nobody is. I drive that same truck. I never got rid of it, though plenty of people have asked why I'd want to keep something connected to a night like that. I keep it because it told the truth when everybody around me was asking it to lie, and I think that's worth something. I think that's worth quite a lot, actually. If you are carrying something right now that belongs to somebody else, some mistake you're covering for, some silence you've been asked to keep because it would be easier for everyone if you just went along with it, I want you to hear this from a man who's already walked that road all the way to the end of it. Love that shields someone from ever facing what they've done isn't love at all. It's just a debt with your name quietly signed onto it instead of theirs. Put it down. Not because you don't love them, because you do. Tell me, friend, where you're watching from tonight and what you would have done in my place, sitting at that kitchen table at 3 in the morning. I read every single comment, and I mean that. If this story found something true in you, stay a while longer, because there are more waiting, and I'll be right here to tell you the next one.